We are going to start today's show talking about that Google Manifesto scandal, so-called scandal, and firing, and the news that the czarina of diversity, human relations, and everything good turns out to be an active Hillary Clinton supporter. And we're going to talk about that with Anton Wahlman, who we talk to semi-regularly. He's a Nevada, well, he's a current resident of Nevada, but we're not going to talk to him about that primary there, which we talked to Jody Rocco about. He's over in Stockholm, which is his ancestral home. He is of Swedish background. In fact, he was born there. We've talked about that. But we're going to talk about Google and just the whole diversity and Orwellian thing going on in Silicon Valley. Anton, thank you for joining me.
Good to be here, Adam.
All right. Well, how much time have you had to process what's going on with Google, or is this just nothing new to you?
Well, we've seen traces of this for a couple of years now. The CEO, I believe it was, of Mozilla, which was a situation in which he got canned a couple of years ago for what is essentially a variant of the scenario that unfolded over the last couple of days. It was really a forebearer of what was to happen here, and I think the situation that we saw here was essentially predictable. I think that what was new in the situation was that we had a guy here who deliberately set out to actually articulate the problem. So he wrote what, if you've actually read the memo, you may or may not agree with 100% of what he put in there. But I think that most sane people would come to the conclusion that he had a very well-reasoned argument that really warranted a serious response, a serious intellectual response by anybody who wanted to debate the other side of the issue. Of course, that didn't happen. And it was, if you ever watched the movie The Last Days of Sophie Scholl, which is about students in Germany in, I believe it was 1943, who, objected to the policies of the then German government. They were basically all sent to the guillotine. That was basically what happened. So this guy basically piped up, expressed exactly what was the problem in terms of these policies at Google, and I think within 24 hours he was fired. So this is a modern-day version of The Last Days of Sophie Scholl. Somebody raised their hand and said, you know what, this does not make a lot of sense. Is there any way we can discuss this? Bam! And they hit him with a 2x4 and he's out. It's absolutely asinine and ridiculous.
A few things I want to respond to. First of all, I forgot to mention in my long-winded intro that Anton Wahlman really focuses on the auto industry now, but he is a veteran of Silicon Valley and an investor in tech companies. And you can find him again on seekingalpha.com. Also, his Facebook page and Twitter feed are very worthwhile. ANTONWAHLMAN. Now, what you just said, first of all, I haven't seen that movie. They used in 1943 in Germany the guillotine. That's just not a method of execution I associated with Germany as opposed to like late 18th century France. But I guess
no, it wasn't for me either, to be honest. But whether it happened that way or not, it is what was depicted very graphically in the movie, for better or for worse, and so it was certainly in there. But it was, that movie, which is, by the way, it's available on YouTube of all places. I don't know if it's there temporarily because of nobody has taken it down, but I looked at it just literally just a couple of days ago, and it was still there. So, and I had seen the movie a couple of years ago. It's in native German and with English subtitles. It is an extraordinary movie, and it'll give you nightmares for years to come if you watch it. Maybe that's not an advertisement, but nevertheless, you ought to watch it.
That'll go great with the Arianna Huffington book on the sleep revolution, which emphasizes the importance of a good night's sleep that I'm reading right now. So I guess no thanks for the time.
Nice compliment. And by the way, the background noise you're hearing is because I'm standing on a street in central Stockholm where, of course, there are all sorts of other things going on. But when basically the whole issue here about what transpired here at Google over the last couple of days, the central question that it raises really amounts to this, if you think about it from a sheer intellectual standpoint, and that is that, is it possible, even in theory, for any person who holds a conservative overall viewpoint who subscribes to anything that is in a Republican Party platform, is it possible for a person like that to even be employed by a company such as Google? I mean, would a person who confesses to profess any of these viewpoints be hired in the first place? And would a person who dares admit to it after they have been employed still be employed? I mean, the implication from what happened here is that the answer is no. Now, some people have tried to get technical about this thing, saying, well, he actually posted these things on a company listserv. I didn't know that listservs were really a thing anymore in this day and age, but nevertheless, that there were some, technicality with respect to how he posted his memo that basically got him fired. I call BS on that because, I mean, seriously, really? Are they going to say that it was because of a technicality in terms of the manner in which he posted his written opinions that got him fired? I mean, that does not pass the smell test. I mean, can you imagine if an alternative viewpoint from the left had been posted, that would have been, say, offensive to...
Can you imagine, Anton, if someone just wanted to acknowledge the 3rd anniversary of the killing of Michael Brown and say, hands up, don't shoot, and if someone had pointed out, I mean, which we know is a lie. That's coming up, I think, the 3rd anniversary. We know it's a lie. If someone had been suppressed for that, could you imagine the outrage? Even though we know it's a complete lie. And I want to respond to 2 other things you said. One, you said, it's not a viewpoint I necessarily 100% agree with. So what? It could be a viewpoint that I 0% agree with. The point is, a company does well, what I would think, by considering all ideas, especially when there's an element, theoretically, at least early on at Google, of creativity there. And here's something I brought up, which is a direction to go in right now. I was talking with Eliakim Cohen yesterday. He publishes Jews News. He's an American who has moved to Israel, lives in Jerusalem. And Israel, not so much in Jerusalem, more in Tel Aviv, has a growing, burgeoning high-tech industry. At some point, I would think they're going to take advantage of the advantages that Silicon Valley is providing by making a lot of people not want to work there who are right of center, which probably is more consistent with an Israeli view. When does Israel start taking away the talent? When do people start going over, say, to hell with this? I'm not going to be ruined mid-career. I'm just going to Israel where there's probably better freedom of speech.
I agree with you, and I think we see some interesting cross pollination there in the sense that you have, for example, a company called Mobileye, which is of course based in Israel. They were acquired. The acquisition just closed yesterday morning. In fact, by Intel, they acquired this company, and the reason was that this talent had been amassing in Israel for this technology, and it could have happened, of course, in Silicon Valley, but it didn't, and now Intel found that they had to spend whatever it was, $14, $15 billion acquiring this company. And you would think that given the high real estate prices and high taxes in Silicon Valley and in California, that a lot of these companies ought to be opening up, for lack of a better term, satellite offices or other R&D offices, not just around the world, but even in other states in the United States. And quietly, we know that companies such as Apple has now hired a lot of people in Austin, Texas, and in other places. So it is, but I mean, compared to California, I would think not. I mean, at some point there's a relative scale here. I mean, obviously Austin inside Texas is like a mini Kremlin in comparison, but it is still, Austin in Texas is still, Rush Limbaugh compared to what's going on in Silicon Valley, where the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks are duking it out.
Sounds like the Bolsheviks are winning,
stepping over each other. Yeah, exactly. So whoever it is, who's got the most extreme, nuttiest Khmer Rouge viewpoint on du jour,
well, maybe not Khmer
basically
Rouge
trampling over the next guy.
Well, maybe not Khmer Rouge. I don't know if they're killing everyone with glasses yet over there. But one other thing with Israel. Yeah. My Jewish bias coming through here. My guess is that the Israeli high-tech company was originally got its original growth because there were so many Russian Jewish entrepreneurs who came over from Soviet Union who had a lot of training and were pretty good. But I'm guessing it's evolving into more than that, and at a certain point it's going to be non-Jews who say, I can do better over there, I'd rather live there, and do my thing than in Silicon Valley. There's more opportunity. Or is it too premature?
Yeah, I mean, I think
to say
it's
that
largely, it could be larger non-religious people. They may be nominally, Lutheran or Baptist or God knows whatever, but, not particularly religious in any one direction at all, but just, sort of secular but conservative, just people who are, you ask them, what's your religion? It's like, I'm capitalist, that's kind of that's the only real, train of thought is just regular plain vanilla capitalist, not particularly, I mean, you would think that even in the United States, there are going to be sanctuaries, for lack of a better term, popping up that would cater to such a population. I think that is going to be a trend that we will be seeing in the coming years for sure.
And I'm sure Israel, if it got its act together, which is a big question when it comes to that government. I think that Israel is already benefiting from some of those things. But, moving to Israel is a big step, right? I mean,
yes. Okay, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there with Anton Wahlman, but, it actually makes me feel a little bit better about technology and Big Brother to know that there might occasionally be a problem when I'm in the Daytona Beach area and he's in Stockholm. It's just not so 100% perfectly easy to do a call. But he's back with me right now. And Anton, we were talking about how, it's not so easy for anyone to just move to Israel. And I think we covered that point. But is there any hope for Europe and tech and any freedom of speech? Or is it so much worse there, in Western Europe at least, than it would be in Silicon Valley even?
Well, I think that does differ a little bit from country to country. I don't think we have seen over here the same militancy on these issues that have been surfacing most recently in Silicon Valley. That doesn't mean that those trends won't spill over onto this part of these shores, which they may very well might. We've seen that with other issues. I think it's a little bit too early to tell, but I do think that there are some areas of Europe where these crazy issues that come up here, whether at Google or at Firefox a couple of years ago, are probably not translatable to those countries. I mean, I'm thinking of countries like Poland and Hungary and so forth, where you simply I don't see those things happening there in the same manner in this day and age.
But there's no tech industry over in Poland and Hungary, and there's not going to be anytime soon. Maybe Russia to some extent, but
there isn't maybe the exact same tech industry that we are thinking about in Silicon Valley in that manner. But we do have other forms of industries where, I mean, for example, the car industry, with which I'm pretty familiar, is basically seeing increased capacity, and of course, cars and tech are converging. And so it's not, too extreme, to see that maybe it could move in that direction.
Well, I'm just saying Germany's in a stronger technological position and also a little bit more politically correct than Poland and Hungary. I mean, as much as we like what Poland and Hungary are doing with the Muslim so-called refugees, they're not quite there tech-wise. That's my only point. I do want to bring up another point in Europe.
Right. They haven't been. Yeah, they haven't been, but they, these things aren't what they were a few years ago, and a few years from now aren't going to be where they are today. But yes.
But I guess Israel's in a much stronger position, like in terms of development, than Poland and Hungary.
They're way ahead. The Israeli situation is, of course, completely different. They're far ahead of the game by leaps and bounds, and I think your thinking there is certainly most fruitful and something we should be watching in the coming years.
By the way, I hear the street in Stockholm. How do I ask this? How noticeable is what's the right term for it? The invasion by migration, hijra, is that the term? That's Sweden is certainly going through right now. How much do you notice it on the streets of Stockholm?
I think the one thing that comes to mind first of all is how segregated it is. In the most expensive parts of town, just like probably you would find in many other European cities perhaps, but certainly in Stockholm, you see relatively little of it in the big scheme of things. If you are in the old classical, most expensive parts that are essentially as expensive as New York or San Francisco or London or whatever, you're just not going to see a whole lot of it. So it's basically mostly, although not completely, but to a significant extent, confined to these enclaves in the deep suburbs where you have it's sort of little, little mini Mogadishus, out there where, you might as well have been airlifted to Baghdad, and there, you're all of a suddenly completely in a different country altogether. I mean, it's the kind of contrast that you would find between going from the heart of Manhattan to the Bronx X number of years ago.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of the contrasts are dramatic, but if you are in the more expensive parts of town, it's very modest impact. Certainly, just by milling around, you don't see much of it.
Interesting. So it sounds a lot like more like Chicago, where there's a sizable minority population, but the reality is you can go to many areas and it's all white in a lot of parts of Chicago, as opposed to, say, a Philadelphia, which is a little bit more integrated neighborhood by neighborhood, I would say. Also a sizable minority.
No, this is extremely segregated. It's extremely segregated, and it's not like it's a zero effect even in the better parts of town, but you do see people moving around that are clearly parts of coming from those parts of the world, but generally speaking, it's fairly well behaved, and you got the, I wouldn't quite call it the burqas, but you've got the little headscarves and everything moving around, and it's not like a big problem or anything. This is kind of a fairly well behaved situation, but then again, we're just seeing that is just so completely different compared to these. We've seen these situations anywhere from Belgium to France, right, where these things are very, very concentrated in certain, parts of, where they have 8% of people are immigrants from a certain part of the world, and that is just not something that you see in the more expensive parts of town.
Is it more Middle Eastern or African, or really a mix over there, or even white European Muslims?
No, that's really the mix. It's Middle Eastern / Somali-ish / Moroccan, Algerian. So that's really the heart of it, is best I can tell.
I don't know. I just sent you that story before we were back on about the model, the English model who was abducted, taken to Italy, and basically auctioned off to the Middle East. Now, the people who kidnapped her, sounds like they were not Muslim. They were Polish. But I'm just wondering your thoughts about that as a European. It's just a tougher time to be a pretty white girl in Europe than it was in the past, or is this the new normal in Europe, even if it wasn't really done by Muslims? It was done by Poles, it sounded like, who have been the most anti-Muslim.
I do think that it's kind of interesting. You talk about cyber commerce from eBay to Amazon, and now we have
wasn't my
particular
intention.
type of cyber commerce. Yeah, so now you have auctioning off of these types of services and goods, as it were. So I do think that this is just a warning that no matter where you are, people really need to be very, very careful. I think this is the sort of stuff that is probably not some sort of very widespread, broader societal trend, but something that, it's going to be with us in all ages and all times and in all places where you really, you do have really bad people. And if you are a pretty young woman, you need to be really, really careful. And I think this is an example of just that.
And the Swedish teenage girls are definitely aware of that now that their concerts are being canceled or they're becoming women only. I mean, I guess they're more aware of it than anyone in the world, possibly.
So you get the sense, just moving around, overhearing people in coffee shops, that people tend to be aware of dangers that are out there. That is, at some point people need to live their lives and so forth, but I'm getting the sense very vaguely that people are aware that the world today is not the world they lived in when they were toddlers or before they were born.
Yeah, they can't act like Malia Obama at Lollapalooza. You're not going to be as safe if you get drunk or drugged up and pass out on the ground like Malia just did. Now, you read the Daniel Greenfield piece, which I think is very essential, from, I think it was yesterday, about McMaster and the purge within the NSC. That is, to me, extremely ominous stuff, and I got to make people aware of that. And I just wanted to get your reaction to what the hell is going on there. Is it a coup, de facto?
We've been hearing this. We've been hearing traces of this going back all the way through there, I'd say, February, that this has been brewing, and it's kind of the power struggles, the palace intrigue, as it were, inside the White House and its closest satellite sort of three-letter organizations, in this case the NSC, have been tilting this way, perhaps. And I think Daniel Greenfield extremely well articulated here the issues at hand and described the various characters of the people involved in terms of who was purged and replaced by whom. We had known about some of them, and I certainly knew about some of them, but when you really put it down together on a kind of like a balance sheet on a piece of paper, he says, here are the people that went out, and on the other side of the ledger you have the people who came in. It's very stark and very ominous. I agree with you completely. I can't say that I've heard the counter argument,
right,
and that there isn't, something else to be said. I wouldn't say that this is the final word on the matter, but I am. This is the stuff that makes gives you the chills. I mean, if this is accurate, if this is truly the objective conclusion of what has transpired here in front of our eyes, then this is one of the scariest things that is happening right under our nose here. So this is something that you would hope that the man himself here at the top of the ticket, and for that matter his vice president, really ought to deal with in a forceful way, because this seems to be going counter to everything that they have articulated and stand for. I can, just if I had to speculate as to why this is happening, I mean, you could see where the president maybe at this point, for whatever reason, trusting of people in a uniform a little bit more, and you've seen the semi-disastrous infighting and the whole Scaramucci affair and all these other things, and now he says, well, that didn't work out. And in a very simplistic manner, he says, well, we got the new chief of staff who seems like a reasonably orderly fella, and then this McMaster guy, his uniform looks fairly similar. So hey, it doesn't sound too bad. So I think we may be witnessing kind of a naive oversimplification from the man at the top of the ticket in that regard, and I think that happens to be, a very foolish move at the moment. Now, in relation to that, I think that you should tell your listeners definitely about something that is quite stunning. I think I may even have sent you a clip about this, but basically,
also scary,
it is the interview. Yeah, the interview that took place supposedly in 1999 by Tim Russert, the host of Meet the Depressed on Sunday mornings, with Donald Trump. Talking about a video clip from 18 years ago in which Trump describes that he thinks North Korea will have the bomb in 3 or 4 years, and that it would be wise to deal with the matter now before the problem has metastasized. And you hear his argument, you hear his description, and you hear his projection as to what is likely to unfold in the coming years and decades. And I've rarely seen something that is so spot on. It's really probably one of the most persuasive things I've seen in a long while, and that says a lot. But he had it down to a T already 18 years ago, and it's as if a nightmare turns into reality here with this thing playing out right in front of our eyes. And I can't predict how it'll end, but we can clearly see that there was at least one person who seems to have predicted the whole thing with a scary piece of accuracy.
Agree. All right. Any other thoughts, Anton?
No, I think that your listeners should definitely Google Trump 1999 Korea. You go Google Trump 1999 Korea. This thing will be the first thing that pops up. It's about a between 2 and 3 minute long video clip of this interview, and when you watch that, I think it's a most useful background to what it could be the most important issue that is facing us at this moment.
All right, Anton, people can follow you at seekingalpha.com. I'll remind people of the spelling, and they can follow you on Twitter and Facebook. Anton, last name Wahlman. Thank you for coming on. I know it was a little tricky doing this with you in Stockholm, but I really appreciate your coming on and giving your insights today.
Thank you, Adam. We'll reconvene.